The air in the apartment always smelled of stale coffee and expensive drafting paper. A scent once like the perfume of progress, but now served as the perfume of distance. Haru sat hunched over his desk, the blue monitor light illuminating his latest architectural masterpiece. He was a man of structures, of steel and glass, yet he was oblivious to the way the walls of his own home were slowly closing in on the woman sitting just a few feet away. Hana sat by the window, her silhouette framed by the cold moonlight. Once, the sound of her piano had filled every corner of their lives, a melody bridging his ambition and her soul. But the piano had been silent for many months, its lid closed and covered in a fine layer of dust that mirrored the neglect growing between them. Their dinners had become rituals of silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of Haru's mouse or the sharp notification pings from his phone. He would eat with one hand while scrolling through emails with the other, his eyes never leaving the screen to see how thin Hana had become, or how her hands trembled whenever she reached for her glass of water. She would stare at her own reflection in the darkened window, a ghost in her own life, waiting for a moment that never came. Whenever she tried to speak, to perhaps mention the results of the doctor's visit or the crushing weight in her chest, Haru would simply raise a hand without looking up. "Not now, Hana. I'm right in the middle of a deadline. This project will change everything for us. Just a little longer." Hana had stopped trying to explain that later was a luxury she wasn't sure she could afford. A secret illness, a quiet storm brewing within her, was slowly eroding her spirit. She had wanted to share the fear, the exhaustion, and the sudden realization that her time was becoming a finite resource. But the fortress of Haru's career was impenetrable. He was building skyscrapers for strangers while the foundation of their love was turning to sand. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The night of the turning point arrived with a roar of professional triumph. Haru had finally landed the contract that would define his career, a massive development project that would place his name among the elite architects of the city. In the office, the air was thick with the scent of expensive whiskey and the sounds of laughter. Haru was the man of the hour, surrounded by colleagues who toasted to his brilliance. Amidst the clinking glasses, his phone buzzed 3 times in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and saw 3 missed calls from Hana. He felt a brief flicker of annoyance. She knew how important this day was. Why couldn't she just wait? While Haru celebrated his future, Hana was sitting in the profound darkness of their living room. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried long ago, replaced by a weary resignation that was far more dangerous. With a steady hand, she began to type into her phone. It wasn't an angry message filled with accusations or demands. Instead, it was a long, heartfelt composition of every word she had been unable to say over the past year. She wrote about the way the light used to hit his face when they first met under the cherry blossoms, and how she had missed the sound of his real laugh. She wrote about her fatigue, her illness, and her decision to stop waiting for a later that was never intended for her. Back at the bar, Haru's phone buzzed on the counter one last time. He saw the notification. "Hana, one new message?" A small, smug smile touched his lips. He assumed it was a congratulatory note, a message of pride from the woman who had stood by him while he climbed the corporate ladder. He felt a surge of affection, but he didn't open it. He wanted to savor the feeling of total victory. He would read her words when he got home, in the quiet of their room, like a dessert after a grand feast. He flipped the phone face down and ordered another round of drinks. The walk home was fueled by the cold night air and the lingering warmth of the alcohol. Haru felt like a king returning to his castle. However, as he reached their building, a strange feeling of unease began to prickle at the back of his neck. The lights in their apartment were entirely off, which wasn't unusual for the hour, but the front door was slightly ajar. A cold and biting breeze blew out from the hallway, carrying with it the scent of nothingness. He pushed the door open, his heart beginning to thud against his ribs. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of sleep. It was the hollow, terrifying silence of a space that had suddenly been emptied of its soul. The cold draft from the hallway should have been a warning, but Haru was intoxicated by victory. He stepped into the silent apartment, closing the door with a satisfied finality. He assumed Hana had simply been careless. He moved through the living room in shadows, not wanting to disturb what he imagined was her peaceful slumber. When he entered the bedroom, he saw the faint outline of her side of the bed. He didn't turn on the lamp. As he climbed under the covers, he reached for his phone. The notification light was a steady rhythmic pulse of blue. Hana, one new message. He smiled with tired affection. He decided he would not open it yet. He wanted to keep this piece of her for the morning, a reward savored alongside breakfast. He placed the phone face down and closed his eyes, falling into a sleep fueled by the arrogance of a man who believed time was an infinite resource. Morning arrived with a harsh brightness. Haru stretched. He rolled over, his hand searching for the familiar warmth of Hana's shoulder, but he met only the cool surface of the mattress. The bed was perfectly made on her side, the pillows undisturbed and cold. He sat up abruptly, the silence of the apartment suddenly feeling heavy and oppressive. He called her name into the hallway, but only the refrigerator hummed. He checked the bathroom, finding her toothbrush dry. He told himself she had gone to the market early, perhaps to buy ingredients for a special meal. He sat at the kitchen table, but his eyes kept wandering to the door. The knot of unease in his chest began to tighten, a cold pressure that made it difficult to breathe. By noon, the silence had become a physical weight. Haru dialed Hana's number, his heart hammering. It rang until the voicemail picked up, her melodic voice telling him she couldn't come to the phone right now. He tried again, and then a third time, his messages turning from inquiries to frantic demands. "Hana, where are you? Please call me back." He watched the screen, waiting for news. He walked to the window where she had spent so many lonely evenings. The piano sat in the corner. He realized with a jolt of terror that he didn't know where she would go. He realized he didn't know what she did when he was buried in blueprints. The sudden vibration of his phone nearly made him drop it. He answered without looking at the caller ID, a desperate "Hana?" escaping his lips. But the voice on the other end was jagged and broken. It was Hana's sister, her words struggling to form through a barrage of hysterical sobs. "Haru, where were you?" she screamed. "They've been trying to reach you all night. Why didn't you answer?" The world seemed to dissolve into a blur. She told him there had been an incident, a medical emergency that had been building in secret. It had happened shortly after 11 o'clock the previous night, mere minutes after she had sent her final message. Haru didn't remember the walk to the hospital. He found himself running through the crowded sidewalks. Every later he had ever said to her returned to haunt him, a chorus of regrets that drowned out the noise of the city. He reached the sterile halls, the scent of antiseptic stinging his eyes. He saw her family huddled in a corner, their expressions a mixture of grief and a quiet, burning resentment. They didn't look at him as he approached. To them, he was already a ghost. He sank into a chair, his body feeling leaden. The silence here was different. It was the silence of a life placed on pause, waiting for a resolution that felt impossible. With trembling hands, he pulled his phone from his pocket. The blue notification light was still blinking, a persistent reminder of his own negligence. "Hana, one new message." It was sent at 11:42 p.m. While he had been laughing with colleagues, Hana had been reaching out to him one last time, his vision blurred as tears finally began to spill over, dripping onto the cold glass. This message was the final bridge across the chasm he had built. With a jagged breath, he swiped the screen, unlocking the chat window. The light of the display illuminated his face, casting long shadows as the many words she had written finally began to appear before his eyes. The words blurred as Haru's eyes scanned the message. Hana hadn't written a letter of spite or a frantic plea. It was a eulogy for a love that had died long before her heart stopped. "Haru," the message began, "I am leaving tonight, not because I don't love you, but because I can no longer find myself in the shadows of your blueprints. I waited for you to look at me tonight. I waited for you to see that I was fading. You were so close. Yet you felt like a star in a different galaxy." As he read, the hospital walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by the colors of a memory 5 years old. He saw them standing under a canopy of cherry blossoms, petals swirling around Hana's radiant face. She had been laughing, her violin case strapped to her back, promising him that they would build a world together where music and light never faded. He remembered their first cheap meal and the warmth of her hand when they signed their lease. Those moments, once considered milestones, now felt like indictments. The message continued, revealing a final devastating irony. I wanted to tell you today that I finally fixed my grandmother's old cello. I was going to play for you tonight. I even found that old melody we hummed when we moved in. I thought maybe, if you heard the music again, you would remember who we used to be." Haru's breath hitched. He looked at his hands, the hands that had held pens and rulers but had neglected to hold her. The contract he had won and the career he had built felt like a mountain of ash. He had sacrificed the sun to master the darkness of his own ambition. A sob tore from his throat, echoing through the room. He collapsed against the wall, the phone slipping from his fingers. The realization was a blow. He had won the world and lost the only person who shared it. The silence now roared in his ears like a storm. It was the sound of a life extinguished while he was busy counting his professional victories. He looked at the award notification on his screen, now a meaningless string of pixels, realizing that success is a hollow trophy when there is no one left to share the view from the top. Desperation took hold as he began to type. "Hannah, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm reading it now. Please, just wait for me. I'll change everything." He hit send, but the little circle just spun and spun. The message was marked as delivered, but the read receipt would never appear. The digital connection was a bridge to a shore that no longer existed. He kept typing, pouring out years of unspoken apologies into the void. But the silence remained absolute. Every character he entered was a ghost of a conversation they should have had months ago. Months passed, and the city's skyline continued to change, but Haru was no longer the one designing it. He had walked away from the firm on the day of her funeral, leaving behind the blueprints of glass towers for a life of quiet penance. Now, he sat on a wooden bench in the same park where the cherry blossoms had once bloomed. The trees were bare, reaching toward a pale winter sky. In his lap sat the old cello, its wood polished to a mirror shine. He didn't play like a professional, but he played with a soul that had been broken and mended. As the notes drifted through the cold air, Haru looked down at his phone one last time. He opened their chat history, scrolled past the wall of his own unanswered apologies, and read her final message once more. He didn't cry this time. Instead, he deleted the unsent drafts that had cluttered his heart. He looked up at the vast sky, watching a single bird disappear into the clouds. He finally understood the cruelest lesson of all, that tomorrow is a ghost, and the only time that ever truly belonged to him was the moments he had let slip away. The weight of her unread words would always remain, a quiet passenger in his soul, reminding him that love requires the courage to look up before it is too late. The music faded into the wind, leaving only the soft rhythmic sound of his own breathing in the vast cold silence of the world.